Chapter 9. The writing on the wall. What's going on here? What's going on? Attracted no doubt by Malfoy's shot. Argus Filch came shouldering his way through the crowd. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. My cat! My cat! What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked. And his popping eyes fell on Harry. You, he screeched. You murdered my cat. You killed her. I'll kill you. Argus. Dumbledore had arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other teachers. In seconds he had swept past Harry, Ron, and Hermione and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. Come with me, Argus, he said to Filch. You too, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger. Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My office is nearest, headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free. Thank you, Gilderoy, said Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart, looking excited and important, hurried after Dumbledore, so did Professor McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there was a flurry of movement across the walls. Harry saw several of the Lockharts in the pictures dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The rear Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore laid Mrs. Norris on the polished surface and began to examine her. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged tense looks and sank into chairs outside the pool of candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's long crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris' fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile, and Lockhart was hovering around all of them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the transmogrifian torture. I've seen it used many times, so unlucky I wasn't there. I know the very counter-curse that would have saved her. Lockhart's comments were punctuated by Fitch's dry, racking sobs. He was slumped in a chair by the desk, unable to look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Much as he detested Fitch, he couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him, though not nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Fitch, he would be expelled for sure. Dumbledore was now muttering strange words under his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand, but nothing happened. She continued to look as though she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar happening in Ouagadougou, said Lockhart, a series of attacks. The full story is in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townsfolk with various amulets which cleared the matter up at once. The photographs of Lockhart on the walls were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to remove his hairnet. At last, Dumbledore straightened up. She's not dead, Argus, he said softly. Lockhart stopped abruptly in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. Not dead, choked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why is she all stiff and frozen? She has been petrified, said Dumbledore. Ah, I thought so, said Lockhart, but how I cannot say. Ask him, shrieked Filch, turning his blushed and tear-stained face to Harry. No second year could have done this, said Dumbledore firmly. It will take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it, Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He found in my office. He knows I'm a, his face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib, he finished. I never touched Mrs. Norris, Harry said loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all the Lockharts on the walls, and I don't even know what a squib is. Rubbish, snarled Fitch. He saw my quick spell letter. If I might speak, headmaster, said Snape from the shadows, and Harry's sense of foreboding increased. He was sure nothing Snape had to say was going to do him any good. Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why was he in the upstairs corridor at all? Why wasn't he at the Halloween feast? Harry, Ron, and Hermione all launched into an explanation about that day party. There were hundreds of ghosts. They'll tell you we were there. Bir dakika, bir dakika. But why not join the feast afterward? Said Snape, his black eyes glittering in the candlelight. Why go up to that corridor? Ron and Hermione looked at Harry. Because, Harry said. He started thumping very fast. Something told him it would sound very far-fetched if he told them he had been led there by a bodiless voice no one but he could hear. Because we were tired and wanted to go to bed, he said. Without any supper, said Snape, a triumphant smile flickering across his gaunt face. I didn't think ghosts provided food fit for living people at their parties. Burada ilginç bir şey fark ettim. Bu Karamazov kardeşlerdeki dördüncü kardeş, bu şeyin bastırdığı olan babanın. O da böyle şey bir tipti. Zayıf, uzun boylu böyle bir kurnaz olan tipti sanki. Snape de böyle gaunt, zayıf bir insan falan. Snape bana onu bayağı bir anımsattı böyle. Zeki olan olmasından dolayı, böyle tespitleri yapan insan olmasından dolayı falan. Hani filmlerdeki Snape'den daha zayıf, daha böyle kurnaz, daha fazla konuşan bir insan görüyor gibiyiz bence bu kitaptaki Snape'te. We weren't hungry, said Ron loud as his stomach gave a huge rumble. Snape's nasty smile widened. I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful, he said. It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he is ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until he is ready to be honest. Really, Severus, said Professor McGonagall sharply. I see no reason to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There's no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong. Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching look. His twinkling light blue gaze made Harry feel as though he were being X-rayed. Innocent until proven guilty, Severus, he said firmly. Snape looked furious through the fridge. Burada devam etmeden önce yani bu klasik benim 7/24 söylediğim işte Dumbledore'un büyük planı teorilerinde Sırlar Odası'nda Süper Kalem Brothers'a göre Dumbledore Harry'nin tam olarak Dumbledore'a güvenmediğinin farkında. Mesela burada bir olay var. İşte Profesör Dumbledore ben size anlatsam olur demiyor mesela. Çünkü şeyi biliyoruz. İşte ne oldu Felsefe Taşı'nda Harry bayıldı. 3 gün uyumuş, uyandı. Daha başına Dumbledore var. İşte Dumbledore gelmiş, onu kurtarmış. Yani bunu duydu. Dumbledore'a sorular sordu. Dumbledore cevapladı falan. Böyle en son Dumbledore gittiğinde Harry'le işte Ron'la Hermione geldiğinde onlara anlattığında olayları falan tam böyle Dumbledore hakkında konuşacakları zaman ilginç bu adam bu Dumbledore işte bence bize hani müsaade etti böyle bence bize fırsat verdi falan ifadelerini gördük hani ama bunların içinde bir şey yok böyle koşulsuz şartsız güven. Hani güvensizlik yok ama güven için bir sebep yok ortada, tamam mı? Şu an o var. Hani Harry'de Dumbledore'a güvenmek için bir sebep yok ortada. Aynen. O Süper Kalem Brothers'ın o videosuna göre işte şey olacak. Hani bu kitapta olacak olaylar sonucunda ne olacağını oraya gelince konuşsak daha iyi olur sanırım. Harry Dumbledore'a güvenini koyacak böyle aynen. Direkt güvenecek. My cat has been petrified, he shrieked. Petrified ne büyük harfle var. Bu ne büyük harfle yazılıyor, ne yazılmıyor. Bunu motor gibi düşünmeye devam ediyorum. Bulasıya söyleyeceğim tabii ki. He shrieked, his eyes popping. I want to see some punishment. I want to see some punishment. Güzel kullanım. We will be able to cure her, argued said Dumbledore patiently. Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made that will revive Mrs. Norris. I'll make it Lockhart butted in. I must have done it 100 times. I could whip up a mandrake restorative draught in my sleep. Excuse me, said Snape icily, but I believe I am the potions master at this school. There was a very awkward pause. You may go, Dumbledore said to Harry, Ron and Hermione. Tam bu ses tonuyla söylediğini anlıyoruz çünkü büyük insanların tartışmaya başladı. Özellikle hocaların bir yerde öğrencilerin o tartışmaya şahit olmaları iyi değil. You may go gibi bir ses tonu çıktığını anlıyoruz. Hikayenin nasıl gittiğini bildiğimizden dolayı. They went as quickly as they could without actually running. When they were a floor up from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty classroom and closed the door quietly behind them. He squinted at his friends' darkened faces. Do you think I should have told them about that voice I heard? No, said Ron without hesitation. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world. Something in Ron's voice made Harry ask, You do believe me, don't you? Of course I do, said Ron quickly, but you must admit it's weird. I know it's weird, said Harry. The whole thing's weird. What was that writing on the wall about? The chamber has been opened. What's that supposed to mean? A chamber, neden room demiyoruz da chamber diyoruz? Bu chamber müzik diye bir olay var. Bunu sanki size de denk geldiydik Marvel'de bir şey okurken de. Bu chamber müzik olunca oda müziği oluyor. Bu oda müzikleri de ne oluyor böyle? Bizim Albert Hall, böyle Google'a yazın bakın olmadı. Boğaziçi'nde Albert Hall içi falan böyle. Öyle bir yerler oluyor herhalde. Hani 100-200 kişinin oturabileceği kapalı, işte böyle kürsüsü olan mekan falan gibi bir şey benim anladığım. Bu chamber room'un büyük olanı, uzun lafın kısası. You know, it rings a sort of bell, said Ron slowly. I think someone told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once. Might have been Bill. And what on earth, a squib, said Harry. To his surprise, Ron stifled a snigger. Well, it's not funny, really, but as it's Fitch, he said. A squib is someone who was born into a wizarding family but hasn't got any magic powers. Kind of the opposite of muggle-born wizards, but squibs are quite unusual. If he's trying to learn magic from a quick spell course, I reckon he must be a squib. It would explain a lot, like why he hates students so much. Ron gave a satisfied smile. He's bitter. A clock chimed somewhere. Midnight, said Harry. We'd better get to bed before Snape comes along and tries to frame us for something else. For a few days the school could talk of little else but the attack on Mrs. Norris, which kept it fresh in everyone's mind by pacing the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. He had seen him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scover's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Fitch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. Bence burada bir sorun var. Fitch nasıl bir şey bulamıyordu, o duvardan o yazıyı silemiyorlar falan. Hani Tom Riddle'ın Ginny'ye söylediği şeyler çok mantıklı olabilir falan ama hani ne diye Tom Riddle'ın söylediği şey duvardan silinemez bir şey olacak falan. Bana biraz absürt geldi. Genevieve seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. Böyle detayları saklıyorlar. But you haven't really got to know Mrs. Norris, Ron told her bracingly. Honestly, we're much better off without her. Ginny's lip trembled. Stuff like this doesn't often happen at Hogwarts, Ron assured her. They'll catch the maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time. Maniac dediği Ginny'ye gitti burada. Ginny öyle düşünüyor tabii. Üzücü, çok üzücü. I just hope he's got time to petrify Fitch before he's expelled. He is expelled. I'm only joking, Ron added hastily as Ginny blanched. The attack had also had an effect on Hermione. It was quite usual for Hermione to spend a lot of time reading, but she was now doing almost nothing else. Nor could Harry and Ron get much response from her when they asked what she was up to, and not until the following Wednesday did they find out. Tabii kızcağız bulanıklar sırada mırada deyince Malfoy ben şu an nasıl bir tehlikeyle karşı karşıyayım falan şey etti. Hermione bu olayını çok seviyorum. Hani böyle bir olan olaylar neticesinde olaylar doğrultusunda araştırma yapmaya falan geçebiliyor. Hani böyle klasik işte derslerimizde bunları öğreneceğiz. Bunlardan başka hiçbir şey yapmayacağız falan. Hani Hermione bir inek değil yani. Aynen. Çünkü kendi olayları, kendi tutkuları, yapması gereken şeylerin önüne geçebiliyor bence. Onun için bir inek değil. Harry had been held back in portions where Snape had made him stay behind to scrape tube worms off the desks. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron in the library and saw Justin Finch Fletchley, the Hufflepuff boy from herbology, coming toward him. He had just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him, turned abruptly, and sped off in the opposite direction. Başlıyoruz. Neye başlıyoruz? Harry'nin dışlanmalarına. Harry found Ron at the back of the library measuring his History of Magic homework. Professor Beans had asked for a 3-foot-long composition on the medieval assembly of European wizards. I don't believe it, I'm still 8 inches short, said Ron furiously, letting go of his parchment, which sprang back into a roll. And Hermione is down 4 feet 7 inches, and her writing's tiny. Where is she? Asked Harry, grabbing the tape measure and unrolling his own homework. Somewhere over there, said Ron, pointing along the shelves, looking for another book. I think she's trying to read the whole library before Christmas. Harry told Ron about Justin Finch fleshly running away from him. Don't know why you care. I thought he was a bit of an idiot, said Ron, scribbling away, making his writing as large as possible. All that junk about Lockhart being so great. Hermione emerged from between the bookshelves. She looked irritable and at last seemed ready to talk to them. All the copies of Hogwarts: A History have been taken out, she said, sitting down next to Harry and Ron. And there's a 2-week waiting list. I wish I hadn't left my copy at home, but I couldn't fit it in my trunk with all the Lockhart books. Bir dakika. All the copies of Hogwarts: A History have been taken out, she said, sitting down next to Harry and Ron. And there's a 2-week waiting list. Şimdi şeyi düşünüyorum. Özellikle bu kitaplar böyle oyalanmış bir şekilde cin tarafından falan yoksa şans eseri Hermione cidden bulamıyor falan mı? Herhalde ikincisi yani ama niye böyle bir ayrıntı vermişler onu da şey demedim. Why do you want it? Said Harry. The same reason everyone else wants it, said Hermione. Tamam, herkes cidden merak etmiş çünkü. To read up on the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. What's that? Said Harry quickly. That's just it. I can remember, said Hermione. Tamam. Tamam, özür diliyoruz. Biting her lip. And I can't find the story anywhere else. Hermione, let me read your composition, said Ron, desperately checking his watch. No, I won't. Tabii eternity falan yok onlarda. Bunlar rap, said Hermione suddenly severe. You had 10 days to finish it. I only need another 2 inches. Come on. The bell rang. Ron and Hermione led the way to History of Magic, flickering. History of Magic was the dullest subject on their schedule. Professor Beans, who thought it was their only ghost teacher, and the most exciting thing that ever happened in his classes was his entering the room through the blackboard. Güzelmiş. Ancient and shriveled, many people said he hadn't noticed he was dead. He had simply got up to teach one day and left his body behind him in an armchair in front of the staff room fire. His routine had not varied in the slightest since. Today was as boring as ever. Professor Beans opened his nose and began to read in a flat drone like an old vacuum cleaner until nearly everyone in the class was in a deep stupor, occasionally coming to long enough to copy down a name or date, then falling asleep again. He had been speaking for half an hour when something happened that had never happened before. Hermione put up her hand. Demek ki Hermione de cidden sıkılıyormuş bu derste. Professor Beans, glancing up in the middle of a deadly dull lecture on the International Warlock Convention of 1289, looked amazed. Miss Granger, Professor, I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Dean Thomas, who had been sitting with his mouth hanging open, gazing out of the window, jerked out of his trance. Lavender Brown's head came up off her arms, and Neville Longbottom's elbow slipped off his desk. Professor Beans blinked. My subject is history of magic, he said in his dry, wheezy voice. I deal with facts, Miss Granger, not myths and legends. He cleared his throat with a small noise like chalk snapping and continued. In September of that year, a sub-comedy of Sardinian sorcerers. He stuttered to a halt. Hermione's hand was waving in the air again. Miss Grant, please, sir, don't legends always have a basis in fact? Professor Beans was looking at her in such amazement, Harry was sure no student had ever interrupted him before, alive or dead. Well, said Professor Beans slowly, yes, one could argue that, I suppose. He peered at Hermione as though he had never seen a student properly before. However, the legend of which you speak is such a very sensational, even ludicrous tale. But the whole class was now hanging on Professor Beans's every word. He looked dimly at them all. Every face turned to his. Harry could tell he was completely thrown by such an unusual show of interest. Oh, very well, he said slowly. Let me see. The Chamber of Secrets. You all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago. The precise date is uncertain. Kaç sene önceymiş? 1000 yıl önceymiş. 1990'da olsak 990'dayız. Ne oluyor orada? Ne oluyor? Hatırlamadım ama heyecanlı mı? The precise date is uncertain. By the four greatest witches and wizards of the age, the four schoolhouses are named after them: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They built this castle together, far from prying Muggle eyes, for it was an age when magic was feared by common people, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. Cadı yakmalar falan. He paused, gazed blearily around the room and continued. Şu an bayağı böyle şey yapıyor. Seminer veriyor gibi anlatıyor. Sesilmesini iyi kullanıyor. For a few years, the founders worked in harmony together, seeking out youngsters who showed signs of magic and bringing them to the castle to be educated. But then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wished to be more selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magic families. He disliked taking students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school. Professor Beans paused again, pursing his lips, looking like a wrinkled old tortoise. Reliable historical sources tell us this much, he said, but these honest facts have been obscured by the fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The story goes that Slytherin had built a hidden chamber in the castle, of which the other founders knew nothing. Slytherin, according to the legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that none would be able to open it until his own true heir arrived at the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets, unleash the horror within, and use it to purge the school of all who were unworthy to study magic. There was silence as he finished telling the story, but it wasn't the usual sleepy silence that filled Professor Bince's classes. There was unease in the air as everyone continued to watch him, hoping for more. Professor Bince looked faintly annoyed. The whole thing is errant nonsense, of course, they said. Naturally, the school has been searched for evidence of such a chamber many times by the most learned witches and wizards. It does not exist, a tale told to frighten the gullible. Hermione's hand was back in the air. Sir, what exactly do you mean by the horror within the chamber? That is believed to be some sort of monster which the heir of Slytherin alone can control, said Professor Binns in his dry, reedy voice. The class exchanged nervous looks. I tell you the thing does not exist, said Professor Binns, shuffling his notes. There is no chamber and no monster. But, sir, said Seamus Finnegan, if the chamber can only be opened by Slytherin's true heir, no one else would be able to find it, would they? Nonsense, oh, Flaherty, said Professor Binns in an aggravated tone. If a long succession of Hogwarts headmasters and headmistresses haven't found the thing, but Professor piped up Parvati Patil, he'd probably have to use dark magic to open it. Just because a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't, Miss Pennyfeather, snapped Professor Beans. I repeat, if the likes of Dumbledore, but maybe you got to be related to Slytherin so Dumbledore couldn't, began Dean Thomas, but Professor Beans had had enough. That will do, he said sharply. It's a myth. It does not exist. There is not a shred of evidence that Slytherin ever built so much as secret broom cupboard. I regret telling you such a foolish story. We will return, if you please, to history, to solid, believable, verifiable fact. Birden böyle deyince Tevfik Fikret'in tarih şiiri geldi aklıma. Bence güzel bir şiir. Ama çok uzun zaman oldu en son okuyayım bence sizde. And within 5 minutes the class had sunk back into its usual torpor. I always knew Salazar Slytherin was a twisted old loony, Ron told Harry and Hermione as they fought their way through the teeming corridors at the end of the lesson to drop off their bags before dinner. But I never knew he started all this pure blood stuff. I wouldn't be in his house if he paid me. Honestly, if the sorting had tried to put me in Slytherin, I'd have got the train straight back home. Hermione nodded fervently, but Harry didn't say anything. His stomach had just dropped unpleasantly. Oh, oh. Şimdi şeyleri görüyoruz, evet. Harry bu Sorting Hat muhabbetini hiç Ron'a, Hermione'ye falan da bahsetmemiş. Yani birden böyle bir şeyler daha fazla gerçeklerin konuşulması gereken durumlara ilerlediği için o gerilim daha gerçek oluyor ve daha güzel olmaya başlıyor bence. Bu Sırlar Odası'nın yeri de ilgincime gidiyor benim bu Harry Potter'ların kitaplarının sıralaması arasında. Hani şey biliyoruz, Ateş Kadehi'nde Voldemort'un gelişiyle Harry böyle asıl mücadeleye başlıyor zaten falan. Hani o Ateş Kadehi'nin o sonlarındaki kısımlardan önceki yerleri bu çocuk kitabı şeyine giriyor bence her türlü. Hani ama bu Sırlar Odası bir şekilde hani bana biraz fazla esrarengiz geliyor. Basilisk falan fazla tehlikeli geliyor, günce falan. Böyle bir türlü ikinci kitap olması şey olmuyor bana. Hani şimdi üçüncü kitaptaki olayları küçümsemek değil bu hani. Dörttekileri zaten küçümseyemiyoruz falan. Ama Sırlar Odası böyle gayet büyük bir insanın vermesi gereken bir mücadelenin hikayesi gibi bence. Aynen. Harry had never told Ron and Hermione that the Sorting Hat had seriously considered putting him in Slytherin. He could remember as though it were yesterday the small voice that had spoken in his ear when he'd placed the hat on his head a year before. You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin would help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that. But Harry, who had already heard of Slytherin House's reputation for turning out dark wizards, had thought desperately, not Slytherin, and had said, "Oh, well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor." As they were shunted along in the throng, Colin Creevy went past. "Hiya, Harry! Hiya, Harry!" "Hello, Colin," said Harry automatically. "Harry, Harry, a boy in my class has been saying you're—" But Colin was so small he couldn't fight against the tide of people beating him toward the great hall. They heard him squeak, "See you, Harry," and he was gone. Burası bayağı komikmiş bence. "What's a boy in his class saying about you?" Hermione wondered. "That I'm students here, I expect," said Harry, his stomach dropping another inch or so as he suddenly remembered the way Justin Finch fleshly had run away from him at lunchtime. "People here'll believe anything," said Ron in disgust. Bu Ron'u cidden çok seviyorum. The crowd thinned and they were able to climb the next staircase without difficulty. "Do you really think there's a chamber of secrets?" Ron asked Hermione. "I don't know," she said, frowning. "Dumbledore couldn't cure Mrs. Norris, and that makes me think that whatever attacked her might not be, well, human." As she spoke, bu bayağı korkuncuma gitti lan şu cümle bu arada. İçim bir şey oldu, hoş oldu şurası. As she spoke, they turned a corner and found themselves at the end of the very corridor where the attack had happened. They stopped and looked. The scene was just as it had been that night, except that there was no stiff cat hanging from the torch bracket, and an empty chair stood against the wall bearing the message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened." Bir dakika. And an empty chair stood. Tamam. "It's where Fitch has been keeping guard," Ron muttered. They looked at each other. The corridor was deserted. "Can't hurt to have a poke around," said Harry, dropping his bag and getting to his hands and knees so that he could crawl along, searching for clues. "Scorch marks," he said. "Here and here. Come and look at this," said Hermione. "This is funny." Harry got up and crossed to the window next to the message on the wall. Hermione was pointing at the topmost pane, where around 20 spiders were scuttling, apparently fighting to get through a small crack. A long silvery thread was dangling like a rope, as though they had all climbed it in their hurry to get outside. "Have you ever seen spiders act like that?" said Hermione wonderingly. "No," said Harry. "Have you, Ron?" "Ron?" He looked over his shoulder. Ron was standing well back and seemed to be fighting the impulse to run. Well back, orayı o well diye okudum. Çünkü hikayenin gidişinden hani Ron'un aşırı korktuğunu anladım örümceklerden. Well oluyor onun için oradaki o well okuma. "What's up?" said Harry. "I don't like spiders," said Ron tensely. "I never knew that," said Hermione, looking at Ron in surprise. "You've used spiders and potions lots of times." "I don't mind them, Dad," said Ron, who was carefully looking anywhere but at the window. "I just don't like the way they move." Hermione giggled. "It's not funny," said Ron fiercely. "If you must know, when I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear into a great big filthy spider because I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either if you'd been holding your beer and suddenly it had too many legs and..." He broke off, shuddering. Jesus. Kötüymüş lan. Çocukluk travmasıymış. Yani ben böyle doğuştan gelen bir şey olduğunu zannediyordum. Uh, he broke off, shuddering. Hermione was obviously still trying not to laugh. Feeling they had better get off the subject, Harry said. "Remember all that water on the floor? Where did that come from? Someone's mopped it up." "It was about here," said Ron, recovering himself to walk a few paces past Fitch's chair and pointing level with the door. He reached for the brass doorknob, but suddenly withdrew his hand as though he'd been burned. "What's the matter?" said Harry. "Can't go in there," said Ron gruffly. "That's a girl's toilet." "Oh, Ron, there won't be anyone in there," said Hermione, standing up and coming over. "That's Morning Myrtle's place. Come on, let's have a look." And ignoring the large "All of Order" sign, she opened the door. It was the gloomiest, most depressing bathroom Harry had ever set foot in. Under a large cracked and spotted mirror were a row of chipped sinks. The floor was damp and reflected the dull light given off by the stubs of a few candles burning low in their holders. The wooden doors to the stalls were flaking and scratched, and one of them was dangling off its hinges. Hermione put her fingers to her lips and set off toward the end stall. When she reached it, she said, "Hello, Myrtle. How are you?" Harry and Ron went to look. Morning Myrtle was floating above the tank of the toilet, picking a spot on her chin. "This is a girl's bathroom," she said, eyeing Ron and Harry suspiciously. "They're not girls." "No," Hermione agreed. "I just want to show them how nice it is in here." She waved vaguely at the dirty old mirror and the damp floor. Asked her if she saw anything, Harry muttered at Hermione. "What are you whispering?" said Myrtle, staring at him. "Nothing," said Harry quickly. "We wanted to ask. I wish people would stop talking behind my back," said Myrtle in a voice choked with tears. "I do have feelings, even if I am dead." "Myrtle, no one wants to upset you," said Hermione. "Harry, only no one wants to upset me." "That's a good one," howled Myrtle. "My life was nothing but misery at this place, and now people come along ruining my death." "We wanted to ask you if you've seen anything funny lately," said Hermione quickly, "because a cat was attacked right outside your front door on Halloween." "Did you see anyone near here that night?" said Harry. "I wasn't paying attention," said Myrtle dramatically. "Peeves upset me so much I came in here and tried to kill myself. Then, of course, I remembered that I am already dead," said Ron helpfully. Burası ilginç çünkü yine Hermione'yi çok tebrik ettim içimden. Çünkü olay burada cidden. Cidden Mızmız Myrtle böyle kilit noktası olayın. Zaten ondan sonra Harry'ler onu anlayacak falan. Hani direkt böyle bunun işkillenmeleri falan, direkt buraya çekilmeleri çok iyi bence yani. Hermione diye başladım ama şu an üçünün de fikri olduğu aklıma geldi. Yani aslında bayağı yakınlar şu an. Myrtle gave a tragic sob, rose up in the air, turned over and dived head first into the toilet, splashing water all over them and vanishing from sight, although from the direction of her muffled sobs she had come to rest somewhere in the U-bend. Harry and Ron stood with their mouths open, but Hermione shrugged wearily and said, honestly, that was almost cheerful for Myrtle. "Come on, let's go." Harry had barely closed the door on Myrtle's gurgling sobs when a loud voice made all three of them jump. "Ron!" Percy Weasley had stopped dead at the head of the stairs, Prefect Beige agleam, an expression of complete shock on his face. "That's a girl's bathroom," he gasped. "What are you?" "Just having a look around," Ron shrugged. "'Cause. Percy swelled in a manner that reminded him forcibly of Mrs. Weasley. "Get away from there," Percy said, striding toward them and starting to bustle them along, flapping his arms. "Don't you care what this looks like, coming back here while everyone's at dinner?" Why shouldn't we be here? Said Ron, hotly, stopping short and glaring at Percy. Listen, we never laid a finger on that cat. That's what I told Ginny, said Percy fiercely. But she still seems to think you're going to be expelled. I've never seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You might think of her. All of her years are truly overexcited by this business. You don't care about Ginny, said Ron, whose ears were now reddening. You're just worried I'm going to mess up your chances of being headboy. 5 points from Gryffindor, Percy said tersely, fingering his prefect badge, and I hope it teaches you a lesson. No more detective work, or I'll write to Mom. And he strolled off, the back of his neck as red as Ron's ears. Harry, Ron, and Hermione chose seats as far as possible from Percy in the common room that night. Ron was still in a very bad temper and kept blotting his charms homework. When he reached absently for his wand to remove the smudges, it ignited the posh fuming almost as much as his homework. Ron slammed the standard book of spells grade 2 shut. To Harry's surprise, Hermione followed suit. "Who can it be, though?" she said in a quiet voice, as though continuing a conversation they had just been having. "Who'd want to frighten all the squibs and muggle-borns out of Hogwarts?" "Let's think," said Ron in mock puzzlement. "Who do we know who thinks muggle-borns are scum?" He looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back, unconvinced. "If you're talking about Malfoy, of course I am," said Ron. "You heard him. You'll be next, mudblows. Come on, you've only got to look at his foul red face to know it's him, Malfoy." "The heir of Slytherin?" said Hermione skeptically. "Look at his family," said Harry, closing his books too. "The whole lot of them have been in Slytherin. He's always boasting about it. They could easily be Slytherin's descendants. His father is definitely evil enough." Bu benim aklıma şey getirdi. Bu Harry 6. kitapta Malfoy'dan şüpheleneceği zaman hem Ron hem Hermione böyle reddedecek Harry'nin bu şüphelerinin gerçeklik payını, ihtimalini. Ee, Harry şu anda Malfoy'dan şüphelenebiliyor falan. Hani Malfoy'u büyük bir olayı tetikleyecek kadar kötü bir insan olarak düşünebiliyor rahat bir şekilde. Aynen. Herhalde bunu anlatmak için konuşmaya başladım. "They could have had the key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries," said Ron, handing it down father to son. "Well," said Hermione cautiously, "I suppose it's possible, but how do we prove it?" said Harry darkly. "There might be a way," said Hermione slowly, dropping her voice still further with a quick glance across the room at Percy. "Of course it will be difficult and dangerous, very dangerous. We'd be breaking about 50 school rules, I expect. If in a month or so you feel like explaining, you will let us know, won't you?" said Ron irritably. "Right," said Hermione coldly. "What we need to do is to get inside the Slytherin common room and ask Malfoy a few questions without him realizing it's us." "But that's impossible," Harry said as Ron laughed. "No, it's not," said Hermione. "All we need would be some polyjuice potion." "What's that?" said Ron and Harry together. Polyjuice. Çok özlü iksir diyorduk. Neyse. "What's that?" said Ron and Harry together. "Sam mentioned it in class a few weeks ago. Do you think we've got nothing better to do in potions than listen to Snape?" muttered Ron. "It transforms you into somebody else. Think about it. We could change into three of the Slytherins. No one would know it was us. Malfoy would probably tell us anything. He's probably boasting about it in the Slytherin common room right now if only we could hear him." "This polyjuice stuff sounds a bit dodgy to me," said Ron, frowning. "What if we were stuck looking like three of the Slytherins forever?" "It wears off after a while," said Hermione, waving her hand impatiently. "But getting hold of the recipe will be very difficult. Snape said it was in a book called Most Potente Potions, and it's bound to be in the restricted section of the library." There was only one way to get out a book from the restricted section. You needed a signed note of permission from a teacher. "Hard to see why we'd want the book, really," said Ron, "if we weren't going to try and make one of the potions." "I think," said Hermione, "that if we made it sound as though we were just interested in the theory, we might stand a chance." "Oh, come on, no teacher is going to fall for that," said Ron. "They'd have to be really thick dediği bunun olduğunu biz anladık, tahmin ettik zaten. Öyle. Hadi görüşürüz.